And today, we're looking at just out of reach. It's just out of reach. Now, the next 30 seconds to a minute is pure pandering, all right? I'm just letting you know, pure pandering, okay? So my friend Mark, we went and visited him 2 weeks ago, and he's got 2 little baby twins. See? That's the pandering right there, right? That's Sarah and Kate, and they're starting to reach for things, right? They're little yet and all that stuff, but they're starting to get out there. It's really cute that Sarah, she's the one that's a little. They're twins, and she's a little chunkier than the other one is. She's already will hold the bottle, right? Like she's already got like that thing down, right? Then she's already starting to listen. And you guys, most of you went through the toddler years, right? You remember all those times that they were reaching out for things and just creaking and just like, if I could just reach just a little bit more. And you put things just out of reach. It's like, come on, and now you can't get to it, right? Like and they're sitting there reaching. It's just out of reach. If you can't tell from also our confession today, that's kind of the theme for today, that oftentimes it feels like salvation or comfort or something like that, something that we don't have, is just if we can strain enough, then we can grasp it, right? That it's just out of reach. It's just right there, right? If I could just get it. Now, I want to get off my sermon just for a second. I want to start it in a different way. Our gospel lesson today, it's an interesting lesson. You guys remember it? I mean, we read it like 5 minutes ago. But it said, don't worry. Don't worry. Like that's... Now, let me ask you a question real quick. If have you ever been like anxious about something? Like really anxious, like really worried about something, and then someone came up to you and was like, just don't worry? Do you respond to them, oh, thank you for saying that word of gospel to me, right? No. Like, you have one or two actions, right? Like that either you kind of like, this person doesn't know anything, and you're just like, get away from me. You're like, don't tell me not to worry, or you get kind of frustrated with it. Or at worst, you get anxiety about having anxiety. Have you ever had that? Like you worry about worrying then? It's like, well, and then you read our gospel lesson today, and you start struggling because, well, Jesus tells me not to worry, and then you start worrying about that because you feel like Jesus isn't going to be happy with you that day. And so you have anxiety about your anxiety, right? Like that's like over there. For years, I had to read this scripture about worrying and be worried about it. Right? It's like, okay, and we take it because it's scripture. We're like, oh yeah, we'll just go to my inner zen with Jesus, right? Like, all right, Jesus, I won't worry about it. And we try really hard not to worry, which is odd, right? Like, and I just didn't understand it. And this has been one of my big things, because I'm kind of, as a person, kind of anxieties just kind of roll off the back like what was like water on the back of a duck or something like that. That's kind of just how I am. But some of you are probably like that. Some of you are so tightly wound that you're like a rubber band at the end of that's about to explode, right? That all of us are kind of different. So I used to be that person that's like, listen, Jesus tells you not to worry. And so I gave people something to worry about all the time. Worry about their worries, right? Like I used to do that all the time. And I looked at it, and I've had a few friends that have had severe anxiety. And I see how unserving that is, and how much more of a burden that actually puts on people. Just don't worry about it, right? Just don't worry about it. There's no gospel in that. So that's over there. And so, what is this about then? Because Jesus doesn't want you to worry. And I don't think he's telling you not to worry. He's giving you somewhere else to look. Okay? He's giving you somewhere else to look. So, and so, here's what I think is going on. And I'm not going to reference what's going on around in our gospel lesson, around the gospel lesson today, and all of at the end of chapter 11 and now into chapter 12. I'm not going to reference it, but as you guys that came to Sunday school this morning will soon realize, you realize that I'm talking about it the entire time. All right? So if you would like to know what was talked about in Sunday school, you should come. Like that's a law statement right there. It is. But we've had some lively discussions today. So I encourage you to come to that. So we live in a world where even from an early age, we're programmed and taught by cultural prophets of our day to reach out and grab more and more and more for ourselves. These cultural prophets are actually just anxiety factories. Anxiety factories that say, if you can just get this, then you'll be happy. Right? That's what they taught. Marketers, 24-hour news commentary shows that show up at 9 o'clock at night. Like they are all, or even religious leaders, right? They're all cultural prophets that are actually anxiety factories, giving you something to worry about. Right? Telling us a message of which way to go, what to do, how to be a good person so that God will love you or whatever, right? Like that's, you guys tracking with it? And it's all just one big anxiety trip and a ton of pressure. It sounds like today, but that's exactly what was going on in Jesus' day. Because the Pharisees back then, they were trying to trap Jesus. After all, Jesus had just been throwing the Pharisees a ton of shade. He's been throwing them shade like crazy. I mean, he basically looked at them and said, you guys are like whitewashed tombs. You guys know what that means, right? You guys, let's put it another way, a Tom Sawyer analogy. You guys are like a rotting fence that you just put white paint on. That you are dead and rotten on the inside, but you look wonderful on the outside. He's calling these Pharisees that to their face. How would you feel about that? You know, like, no wonder they're grumbling in the background. It's like, listen, we got to do something about this Jesus fellow. He's like, it hurts my feelings when he talks like that, right? Like there's over there, but everyone knows that it's true. Because these Pharisees and religious leaders back then had taught that you had to follow the law so that God would love you. And if you had followed it well enough, then perhaps the age of the Messiah would come in. That we'd be able to kick Rome back to the sea. They had even made these 600 and some odd rules and regulations and laws that you had to follow. And they were starting to get upset because Jesus isn't doing these things. He didn't wash his hands before a meal. Right? Like that's, and they got upset at it. He was forgiving people that everyone had declared unforgivable. He was healing, too, people on the no-no day, on the Sabbath. He was healing those folks. And he's telling all these people, and people are beginning to follow him all the more. And the Pharisees are like, we got to do something about this guy because he's announcing freedom from us, from what we're announcing. We're telling people they got to do all these things, and he keeps saying, no, just trust in God. It'll be all right, right? Like, and so they begin to trap him. These cultural prophets of the day who have put burden upon burden on God's people, he's trying to trick them. They're trying to trick Jesus. Because these cultural prophets are trying to tell the people that they need to do more and more and more. Like listen, all these marketers, 24-hour news shows, our favorite ad campaign, like all this stuff, even our political leaders and religious leaders, I throw myself into that camp too. Like we have all these, that we are cultural prophets that are telling you that you need to, what to do and to have more in order so that you can have a more fulfilling life. We need to reach out more, be more like them. Then finally we will be happy. In the 21st century America here, we're a very anxious people. There's pressure to have all these goals, to have all these things, to try to get to stuff that is just out of reach. Goals to have more, goals to earn more, goals to reach farther and farther. And there's this huge pressure that you're a failure if you don't meet these goals. And the situation is tough around us. This was a study done in 2010. 2010, almost 10 years ago. Think about that. It's almost been 20 years since 2000 happened. Think about that. That's, like, I was a fresh adult in 2000. That's what's really like, I was 18, and I was like, that means I'm getting up. Yeah. I know you guys are like, oh, you're so young, but listen, I've got my issues. But in 2010, there was a study done, and there's the highest percentage of anxious Americans since the Great Depression in 1930. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, over 40 million Americans, 18.1% of the population, suffer from high levels of anxiety. That's 1 out of 5 people. What is there, 110, about 110 in here today? That's 6 people. No, that's not 6 people. That's 12 people in here that have severe, high levels of anxiety. And some people are sitting in here, I don't know, I think it's more like 80%, but that's like over there, right? We live in a world filled with all these expectations, whether it be from social media or the TV or friends, like all these things seem to be grasping for something that is just out of reach. Wanting everyone to clean up their life. And we see people, on these platforms doing amazing things, and we look at our own lives and you're like, man, I can't afford a trip to, I don't know, Tulsa. I don't know where you guys want to go. I can't afford a trip. I can't afford a trip to fancy Tulsa. What's another city I can? The Phoenix. Like that's. And we see all these amazing trips that happen. We're like, man, I can't do that. Listen, I play off of this too. It was 85 degrees yesterday. No, this morning I was talking to a DCE friend, a director of Christian education friend back in Arkansas, and they're closing down church today because it's snowing. And he has the same web platform, and he needed to put an announcement on his website about it, that they were closing today. And I was like, it was 85 degrees yesterday. and I'm just giving him a goal to attain, right? But that's like the whole idea though, right? It's all these things. It's like, wow, this looks amazing. This looks amazing. If I could just get to that, then my life would be so much better. And that's what the Pharisees and the teachers of the law and these lawyers back then were telling people. Like, you got to do all this. And Jesus points it out at the end of chapter 11. He says, you guys are causing a burden on all these people. Now, I know they're all asking for it. They're all asking, what do I have to do to be saved? And you were giving them concrete steps in order to be saved because you're just giving them the law and expecting it to save them. And Jesus is calling them out on it. He says, watch for the leaven of the Pharisees. And he begins to tell them a story about a man who has all this wealth, and he begins to build bigger and bigger barns to store all of his wealth in it. And he's reached out, and he's finally gotten enough. And he says this, but God says to him, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God." He says, you're missing the point. Don't you know that God has got you? Quit reaching out for those unobtainable goals. You're killing yourself by doing it. And oftentimes we need to wake up and say to ourselves, quit reaching. That's not our purpose. Our purpose in life is that God is always reaching out to us and coming to us. And he continues with verse 22. He says, and he tells this to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you'll eat, or about your body, what you'll put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap, and neither store in barns, and yet God feeds them. How much more value are you than just birds?" Right? He says, don't be anxious, but he gives them something to realize about not being anxious. It's not just don't be anxious so that you can have anxiety about your anxiety. That's not what he's doing. He's saying, look away from all the cultural prophets that are whispering in your ear that you got to be bigger, better, better, richer, something, poorer, I don't know, whatever. You have to be something else in order for God to love you. And he's like, you are created in the image of God. Look at all these other birds and stuff. Look at the lilies of the field. They're beautiful. Look away from all of those liars and cheats who want to craft you in their image. Realize that you are crafted in God's image. So that's how he's saying, don't be anxious. He's saying, realize, quit looking for the image of whatever it means to be the perfect American. Get away from that. He says, it's a false hope and a false God. Realize that you were already created in God's image and rest in that. Quit looking after the image of all these other people. Rest in the image of God. The cultural prophets will always tell you to reach out for more, and Jesus reaches out to you and he says, I got you. I got this. Stop worrying about trying to have that perfect life, about having enough. Stop worrying about that you've done too much wrong in your life. Stop listening to those cultural prophets. They're telling you to craft in their image. Be this, do this. Realize that you were created in the image of God. And this is what God does. Like, the interesting thing is that God's salvation isn't just this nebulous thing that he's like talking on top of a hill, holding his hands some way or something like that. Where he's saying, don't worry, God will get you. It'll be cool, He's not doing that. He's not yelling at everyone. Instead, he takes all of the message of the cultural prophets, the messages of fit in, do this, do that, worry about it, reach out for it. He takes all of that onto the cross with himself. He takes all of our anxiety and pain and he brings it down to nothing. Now, here's what I think is really interesting, and you nailed it during Sunday school today. And I had to be careful that I didn't, What was Satan, the accuser, the devil, the evil one, trying to get Jesus to do in the wilderness when he was tempting him. He was trying to get him to accept more than what he had right then, right? He was hungry. Hey, if you will just worship me, I'll give you all the nations of the world, right? All this stuff. And Paul says he was tempted in every way like we are. And we end up seeing that same Jesus who resisted all those temptations that bring us anxiety and hurt and pain and in ourselves, he takes them all the way to the grave where they have no power over us. Because he rises again and says, I'm your life and your resurrection. Breathe. Have the Spirit. Breathe. I grew up with a message of salvation was, you got to do this. I now think this is what salvation is. That make sense? After you do something, like you're working or something like that, and you just finally okay, I'm okay. Like when you have that kind of scare with the doctor and you don't know what the news is going to be, but he tells you it's actually good news, and you're like, okay. I think that's salvation. I think that's the rest. That's the Sabbath. And it's here for each and every one of you because God loves you so much. And I think when Jesus is telling you to not worry, he's not telling you that to give you something to worry about because he'll be sad for you. He's giving you something. He's giving you a frame of reference where you can go, oh, okay, I'm all right. And I think that's good news. That's good news. And we'll end right there. Jesus